Let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever told someone your big plan and then felt the fire fade a little afterward? You told yourself you would wake up at 5 in the morning. You promised you were finally going to start going to the gym. Maybe you even shared that business idea with a few friends, and in that moment it felt powerful. It felt like progress, like you had already started becoming the person you wanted to be. But a few days later, the energy was gone. The plan that once felt alive slowly slipped back into silence. There is a strange truth about human nature that people have been noticing for centuries. The moment we begin performing our ambitions, we often start weakening them. Talking about the future can trick the mind into feeling as if progress has already been made. But real transformation rarely happens in the spotlight. It happens quietly, in discipline, in restraint, in the moments when no one is watching and you still choose to move forward. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." And the moment you truly understand that idea, the way you move through life begins to change. Most people misunderstand silence. They assume silence means weakness. They assume that if you do not argue back, you must have somehow lost. But silence is rarely weakness. More often, it is self-control. In a world where reactions are instant and emotions are easily provoked, the ability to remain steady has become rare. It almost feels unnatural now. People expect noise, they expect defense, they expect an immediate response. But the person who understands silence sees something deeper. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is discipline. Think about the last time someone tried to provoke you. Maybe it happened at work and someone questioned your competence in front of others. Maybe it happened online where a stranger misunderstood your words and twisted them into something they were not. Or maybe it happened in a conversation where a sarcastic remark was thrown your way simply to test your reaction. The moment it happened, your mind began building a response. You imagined the perfect comeback. You rehearsed the argument in your head. Your heart rate rose. Your thoughts accelerated. Emotions started pushing you toward reaction. And suddenly you faced a simple decision: react or remain steady. Most people react without thinking. It feels powerful. It feels like defending yourself. But reacting instantly reveals something important. It shows that your emotional state can be moved by someone else. And the moment someone else can control your reaction, they begin to influence your direction. Silence breaks that pattern. It creates space between emotion and action. And inside that small space, something powerful appears: clarity. Instead of reacting through anger or pride, you begin observing the moment itself. You see the situation more clearly. Strength often begins with something very small: a pause. When you remain calm while someone expects a reaction, something unusual begins to happen. The person provoking you becomes uncomfortable. They were prepared for resistance. They were prepared for an argument. But they were not prepared for composure. So they continue talking. They explain more. They push harder. And with every additional sentence, they reveal more than they intended. Their impatience appears. Their insecurity becomes visible. Their motives slowly surface. Meanwhile, you remain steady. You listen. You observe. You allow the moment to unfold without rushing to defend yourself. This does not mean ignoring emotion. Emotion is natural. You still feel that first spark of irritation. You still notice the tension rising in your chest. The difference is that you do not allow that spark to dictate your behavior. You notice it, you acknowledge it, and you let it pass before it becomes action. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." That difference between feeling and reacting is where discipline is built. Most people collapse that space instantly. They feel something and respond without reflection. But the disciplined person allows that space to exist. And within that space, choice appears. The moment you realize that you can pause before reacting, your relationship with conflict begins to change. Situations that once felt overwhelming begin to lose their intensity. Instead of being pulled into arguments, you begin stepping slightly outside them. You start seeing the patterns in how people behave when they want control, validation, or attention. This awareness changes the way others experience you. People who expect emotional reactions suddenly face calm observation instead. They notice that their words do not easily disturb you. They notice that their attempts to provoke you lose their effect. And slowly, the dynamic shifts. The person who remains steady begins holding the real control in the situation. Over time, this habit reshapes your character. Silence becomes more than restraint. It becomes preparation. Every moment you choose composure over reaction strengthens your discipline. Every pause sharpens your awareness. And the more you practice this quiet control, the more clearly you begin seeing the world around you. If ideas like this resonate with you, if you're someone who wants to think deeper, live with more discipline, and build quiet strength in a noisy world, consider subscribing and continuing this journey. This does not mean ignoring emotion. Emotion is natural. You still feel the initial spark of irritation or frustration. The difference is that you do not allow that spark to control your behavior. You notice it, acknowledge it, and let it pass through you without turning it into action. The modern world trains people to react instantly. Messages demand immediate replies. Opinions are formed in seconds. Outrage spreads faster than reflection. But the person who practices silence learns to slow that rhythm. Instead of reacting automatically, they observe the moment carefully. They ask themselves whether a response will improve the situation or simply satisfy pride. Many conflicts lose their power the moment you refuse to feed them with reaction. Silence also protects relationships. Words spoken in anger rarely disappear once they are said. A single sentence delivered in frustration can damage trust that took years to build. When you pause before speaking, you give yourself the chance to choose words that build rather than destroy. Seneca once said, "Anger, if not restrained, is frequently more harmful to us than the injury that provokes it." Silence becomes the tool that restrains that anger before it creates damage. Over time, this habit changes the way people perceive you. Calmness carries weight. When someone realizes that their attempts to provoke you do not work, their strategy loses power. They may try again, but the effect becomes weaker each time. Eventually, they understand that your emotional state is not easily moved. That realization creates respect, even among those who disagree with you. Silence also sharpens perception. When you speak less, you listen more carefully. You begin noticing details that others miss. Tone of voice, small shifts in expression, the difference between what someone says and what they actually mean. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Moments of irritation become opportunities for awareness rather than battles to win. That awareness strengthens character. Instead of chasing every argument, you begin choosing which moments truly deserve your attention. Some conflicts fade the moment they are ignored. Others reveal themselves as misunderstandings rather than attacks. With patience, you learn that not every challenge requires a defense. Quiet self-control begins shaping your reputation. People start noticing that you do not react impulsively. You do not chase arguments or raise your voice to prove your point. Instead, you remain composed even when tension rises. This steadiness signals something powerful. It shows that your behavior is guided by discipline rather than emotion. And that quiet discipline becomes the foundation of a stronger life. Because once you learn to control your reactions, you begin controlling something far more important: the direction of your actions. Instead of being pulled by every emotional trigger, you move with intention. Instead of being led by impulse, you lead yourself. That is where the deeper transformation begins. Silence becomes more than restraint. It becomes preparation. And preparation naturally leads the mind into a more strategic way of thinking, where every pause becomes an opportunity to observe, understand, and move forward with greater clarity. Now consider something deeper. There is a pattern many people repeat without even noticing it. They talk about their plans long before those plans have taken shape. They announce the early idea, share the excitement, explain the vision in detail. And for a moment it feels powerful. It feels like the first step has already been taken. But something subtle is happening in the mind during that moment. The mind begins rewarding the idea before the work has even begun. When you tell people about your goals, your brain receives a small reward. Someone says the idea sounds impressive. Someone offers encouragement. Someone shows interest in what you plan to do. That attention creates a feeling of progress. It feels as if something meaningful has already happened, yet nothing has actually been built. The structure is still imaginary. The work is still waiting. Because of that early reward, urgency quietly fades. The mind believes it has already moved forward, even though the real work remains untouched. This is one of the quiet traps that slows people down. The energy that should be used for building is partially spent on explaining. The excitement that should drive discipline becomes diluted by validation. Seneca once said, "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity." That preparation rarely happens in public. It happens in quiet effort, in repeated attempts that no one else sees. The person who constantly speaks about future achievements often begins to confuse intention with accomplishment. Words begin replacing actions. The conversation becomes the substitute for the work. Real builders move differently. They understand that early excitement must be protected, not displayed. Instead of announcing every step, they begin working quietly. They test ideas in silence. They make mistakes privately. They adjust their approach again and again without the pressure of explaining every change. Their attention remains focused on improvement rather than appearance. This quiet phase is often misunderstood. From the outside, it can look like nothing is happening. People might assume progress has stalled, but something very different is unfolding beneath the surface. The person is experimenting. They are learning through experience. They are strengthening their abilities through repetition. Each small effort adds another layer of understanding. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That becoming rarely happens in public view. It develops slowly through private effort and honest self-examination. The person who works quietly begins discovering strengths and weaknesses that cannot be seen from the outside. They learn what truly works and what only sounded good in conversation. Silence creates the environment where that learning can happen freely. When no one expects immediate results, there is room to experiment without pressure. Failure becomes less embarrassing and more instructive. Instead of defending every step, the builder simply continues adjusting the process. Progress becomes steady rather than dramatic. Over time, these quiet adjustments create real momentum. The small improvements begin connecting together. Skills become sharper. Understanding becomes deeper. Confidence grows not from applause, but from evidence. The person starts noticing that problems which once seemed difficult now feel manageable. This is how capability grows, slowly and steadily. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good person should be one." That message carries a quiet discipline within it. Becoming something meaningful requires more doing than explaining. The less time spent announcing intentions, the more time remains for real effort. There is also another reason silence protects growth. When an idea is still fragile, outside opinions can easily weaken it. Some people offer advice that comes from their own fears rather than from experience. Others question the plan simply because it challenges what they believe is possible. Even supportive voices can sometimes distract the focus of the builder. By keeping the early stages quiet, you allow the idea to mature before exposing it to judgment. The mind stays clear of unnecessary doubts. Energy remains directed toward creation rather than defense. This protection is not secrecy for its own sake. It is simply discipline. Consider how nature works. A seed grows underground long before anyone sees the plant. During that hidden stage, roots spread quietly through the soil. Strength develops where it cannot be observed. If the seed were exposed too early, the growth would struggle to survive. Human ambition often follows the same pattern. The strongest results usually come from long periods of invisible effort. When people finally notice the outcome, they often assume success happened quickly. What they do not see are the months or years of quiet preparation that made that moment possible. Aristotle once said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Habits form through repetition, and repetition rarely attracts attention. The person who continues working quietly develops routines that gradually shape their character. Those routines create consistency, and consistency produces results that no explanation could ever match. Over time, something interesting happens. The person who once felt the urge to announce every plan begins to value privacy more than attention. They realize that silence protects focus. It removes the pressure to impress others and replaces it with the freedom to improve. Work becomes the priority rather than recognition. Eventually, the results begin to appear, not through dramatic announcements, but through visible competence. Skills sharpen, ideas turn into real structures. What once existed only in conversation now stands in front of people as evidence. Observers begin wondering when the change occurred. They assume the success appeared suddenly, but the person who built it knows the truth. The process began long ago, in quiet moments when nobody was watching. Silence protected the fragile stage of growth until the work became strong enough to stand on its own. That realization changes the way you approach ambition. Instead of announcing the direction, you focus on walking the path. Instead of explaining the vision, you invest your energy in building it. Over time, the work itself becomes the message. And once that habit forms, the mind naturally begins moving toward deeper reflection, where quiet effort is supported by careful thought and a more deliberate understanding of every step forward. Silence by itself is powerful, but it is only the beginning. Silence creates space, yet what you place inside that space determines whether it becomes wisdom or simply avoidance. True growth happens when silence is paired with deep thinking. Without reflection, quietness can become passivity. But when silence is combined with honest thought, it turns into one of the most powerful tools a person can develop. Deep thinking rarely begins in a comfortable place. It usually begins in a moment of discomfort, often when something in your life does not feel right. Maybe a conversation ended badly. Maybe a decision created consequences you did not expect. Maybe you noticed a pattern repeating itself again and again. At first, it is tempting to look outward. It is easy to blame the situation, the other person, or the environment. Most people spend a large part of their lives analyzing the mistakes of others while overlooking their own behavior. But real understanding starts somewhere else. It starts when you turn your attention inward. Instead of asking what someone else did wrong, you begin asking yourself different questions. What part did I play in this situation? Where did I lose control of my reaction? Did my pride influence the way I responded? These questions are not comfortable. They expose habits that the mind would prefer to hide, yet they are the doorway to genuine improvement. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Look within. Within is the fountain of good." That simple idea carries a profound truth. Real change rarely begins by fixing the outside world. It begins by understanding the patterns inside your own mind. When you examine your reactions honestly, you start noticing things that were invisible before. You begin recognizing moments when emotion moved faster than reason. Most people never take that step. Instead, they protect their ego by building explanations. They convince themselves that every conflict was caused by someone else. Every failure becomes proof that circumstances were unfair. That belief might protect pride for a moment, but it quietly removes the possibility of growth. If the world is always the problem, then nothing inside you ever needs to change. Deep thinking breaks that illusion. It asks you to look carefully at your own behavior. Perhaps the disagreement you experienced was not only about the other person. Perhaps your tone added tension. Perhaps your impatience closed the door to understanding. These realizations can feel uncomfortable at first, yet they are also empowering. The moment you recognize your own influence on a situation, you regain the ability to change future outcomes. Epictetus once said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." That process begins with clarity about who you truly are in the present moment, not who you hope to be or who you pretend to be in front of others, but the real person revealed through your daily choices. Honest reflection helps bridge the distance between those two versions. This kind of thinking is not about harsh self-criticism, it is about careful observation. Imagine watching your own actions as if you were an outside observer. You notice how you respond under pressure. You notice how you react when someone disagrees with you. You notice whether patience or impatience guides your decisions. Over time, those observations form a map of your behavior. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Many people believe their life is shaped only by outside forces, yet hidden patterns often guide their choices. Without reflection, those patterns remain invisible. But once they become visible, they lose much of their power. Awareness turns unconscious habit into conscious choice. Gradually, the illusions begin to fade. The illusion that you are always right becomes harder to maintain when you honestly review your own mistakes. The illusion that you are always the victim weakens when you see the role your reactions sometimes play. Even the illusion that circumstances alone determine your life begins to change when you realize how often your decisions shape outcomes. This clarity changes the way you move through the world. Situations that once triggered frustration now invite curiosity. Instead of reacting immediately, you pause long enough to observe your thoughts. Instead of defending your pride, you examine whether there is something useful to learn. Each moment of reflection becomes a small adjustment in the direction of growth. Plato once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." A life without reflection often becomes a life guided by habit and impulse. But when you take time to examine your thoughts and actions, you begin shaping your character deliberately. Your choices become more intentional. Your reactions become calmer. Your direction becomes clearer. Over time, this practice strengthens your judgment. You become less influenced by temporary emotion and more guided by steady understanding. When conflict appears, you notice the impulse to react, yet you also recognize that impulse as only one option among many. That recognition gives you freedom. Slowly, the mind becomes quieter and sharper at the same time. Silence creates the space, and deep thinking fills that space with understanding. Together, they build a form of inner stability that cannot be easily disturbed by outside events. And once that stability begins to grow, another realization naturally follows. The choices you make in the present moment are not isolated. They create ripples that extend far into the future, shaping the direction of your life in ways that only thoughtful attention can truly reveal. Deep thinking slowly changes the way you experience time. At first, the shift is subtle, almost unnoticeable. But over time, it transforms how you interpret everyday decisions. Most people live almost entirely inside the next few minutes. They respond to what feels good right now. They follow impulses that promise quick relief or quick satisfaction. The moment presents a choice, and the easiest option often wins. That pattern is not unusual. Human beings naturally prefer comfort in the present moment. When something feels difficult, the mind searches for the fastest escape. When something feels pleasant, the mind wants to repeat it. Without reflection, life becomes a series of short reactions. One decision follows another, each guided by immediate emotion rather than careful thought. Yet when the mind begins practicing deeper reflection, another question starts appearing quietly in the background. Instead of focusing only on the present feeling, the mind begins asking where the decision might lead. A single moment is no longer seen as isolated. It becomes connected to the next moment and the one after that. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." This idea changes how challenges are interpreted. A difficult choice is no longer simply an inconvenience to avoid. It becomes an opportunity to strengthen character and direction. When a person begins thinking this way, the present moment becomes more meaningful. Consider how a single sentence spoken in frustration can reshape a relationship. Words spoken quickly can create wounds that last much longer than the moment that produced them. At the same time, a small act of patience can strengthen trust that grows quietly over years. These outcomes rarely appear in the first few seconds of a decision, yet they are hidden inside it. Deep thinkers begin recognizing those hidden consequences. They understand that each action leaves a trace. A careless decision may not cause immediate damage, but repeated carelessness gradually forms a pattern. In the same way, a small act of discipline may feel insignificant today, yet repeated discipline slowly builds strength. Seneca once said, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." Each moment quietly closes one path and opens another. The decisions made today slowly become the circumstances of tomorrow. When this idea becomes clear, daily choices begin carrying more weight. They stop being temporary reactions and start becoming small steps toward a larger direction. Most people rarely notice this process because life moves quickly. Days pass, routines repeat, and time seems to flow without much reflection. But the person who pauses long enough to observe their choices begins seeing connections others overlook. The present moment becomes a place where the future is quietly being shaped. Epictetus once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Mastery begins with understanding how actions compound over time. A person who reacts impulsively in the present moment often feels controlled by circumstances, but the person who pauses before acting slowly gains influence over the direction of their life. This awareness encourages patience. Instead of chasing quick satisfaction, the mind begins appreciating slower progress. Improvement no longer depends on dramatic changes. It depends on consistent choices repeated day after day. One decision may seem small, but many small decisions moving in the same direction create powerful momentum. Carl Jung once said, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." Clarity about the future does not appear suddenly. It develops gradually through honest reflection about what truly matters. The more carefully a person observes their motives and habits, the clearer their long-term direction becomes. With that clarity comes a different relationship with time. Instead of rushing toward immediate results, the mind becomes comfortable building slowly. Progress may not always be visible right away, yet the process itself becomes meaningful. Each deliberate action adds another layer to the foundation being built. This mindset also protects you from manipulation. Many pressures in life operate by creating urgency. When someone demands an immediate response, they often remove the opportunity for reflection. The person who practices deep thinking learns to recognize this pressure and step back from it. A pause restores perspective. When you pause long enough to consider the future, many emotional reactions lose their urgency. A conflict that once seemed overwhelming becomes manageable when seen from a wider perspective. A challenge that once felt frustrating begins to appear as a lesson that strengthens resilience. Gradually, the mind becomes more deliberate. Choices are no longer guided only by emotion, they are guided by intention. Instead of asking what feels easiest right now, you begin considering what will build strength over time. Instead of reacting automatically, you act with awareness. Aristotle once said, "Patience is bitter, but its fruit is sweet." That patience grows naturally when a person understands the relationship between present effort and future outcome. Each disciplined action becomes an investment rather than a burden. Through this way of thinking, the present moment transforms. It stops being merely a reaction to circumstances. It becomes a place where character is shaped and direction is chosen. Every decision becomes a small brick placed carefully into the structure of the future. And as this awareness grows, another realization slowly appears. The quiet discipline developed in these moments does more than shape decisions. It begins creating a deeper kind of progress, one that moves steadily forward without the need for constant recognition or attention from others. When you begin to think in longer time horizons, something subtle begins to change inside you. The need for immediate recognition starts fading. At first, you might not even notice it, but gradually the desire to be seen, praised, or acknowledged becomes less important than the quiet satisfaction of steady progress. The long game reshapes your priorities. Instead of asking whether people noticed your effort today, you begin asking whether your effort moved you one step closer to the person you want to become. This shift creates a surprising sense of freedom. Public recognition often comes with invisible pressure. When success happens loudly, expectations appear just as quickly. People begin watching every move. They measure every result. They compare your next step with your last achievement. What once felt like victory slowly becomes a performance that must be repeated again and again. That pressure can turn growth into a kind of burden. Quiet progress moves differently. It develops without an audience. It grows slowly, almost invisibly, beneath the surface of everyday life. There are no announcements, no dramatic moments of applause, just consistent effort repeated day after day. Over time, those small efforts begin connecting together, forming a kind of momentum that becomes stronger with each passing year. Seneca once said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." Much of that waste happens when attention is spent on appearance rather than substance. When energy is directed toward being seen instead of becoming skilled, progress weakens. But when effort is directed quietly toward improvement, something remarkable begins to happen. Think about people who quietly dedicate themselves to learning. While others spend hours chasing distraction, they read. While others debate endlessly about ideas, they practice them. While others search for attention, they invest their time in developing ability. In the beginning, this difference is difficult to notice. Their progress appears slow and ordinary. But years later, the contrast becomes undeniable. The person who practiced quietly begins demonstrating competence that seems almost effortless. Their understanding feels deeper. Their reactions are calmer. Their abilities appear refined. To observers, it may look as if success arrived suddenly, yet the person who built it knows the truth. It was never sudden. It was the result of years of silent preparation. When someone chooses discipline instead of attention, they step away from the cycle of constant comparison. Their focus turns inward toward improvement rather than outward toward approval. Quiet wins often last longer because they are built on strong foundations. A victory achieved only for attention fades quickly once the applause disappears. But a skill developed patiently continues serving the person long after the moment of recognition has passed. Discipline compounds in ways that attention never can. This compounding effect resembles the way small investments grow over time. A single effort may seem insignificant. Yet, when repeated consistently, the results begin multiplying. 1 hour of focused practice today may not feel extraordinary, but repeated over months and years, that same effort becomes mastery. Quiet discipline quietly transforms ordinary time into extraordinary growth. Epictetus once said, "No great thing is created suddenly. The most meaningful achievements rarely appear overnight. They are constructed through repeated actions that may feel small in the moment. The builder continues even when there is no applause, no encouragement, and no visible reward. Each effort becomes another brick placed carefully into the structure of progress." Carl Jung once said, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity." That inner necessity often grows stronger when attention from the outside world becomes less important. When the desire to impress others fades, curiosity and genuine interest begin guiding effort. The work itself becomes the motivation. This internal motivation creates a quieter kind of confidence. Instead of depending on praise, the person begins trusting their own discipline. They know how much effort they have invested. They know how many obstacles they have faced quietly. That knowledge forms a deeper foundation than public approval ever could. Over time, the results begin appearing naturally. People notice the calm skill developed through years of repetition. They see the clarity that comes from careful thinking. They recognize the steady improvement that never demanded attention. The recognition may come slowly, but when it does, it carries a different weight. Quiet progress also protects peace of mind. Without the pressure of constant evaluation, the person remains free to experiment and adapt. Mistakes become part of learning rather than public failures. Growth continues without the burden of maintaining a public image. The process stays honest. Habits formed quietly shape the direction of an entire life. Each small action repeated with discipline becomes part of a larger pattern. Over time, that pattern defines character. The person who embraces quiet progress gradually realizes that recognition is not the goal. The goal is becoming capable, steady, and resilient. Applause may come, or it may not. Either way, the work continues. The satisfaction comes from knowing that each day added another layer of strength. And once that mindset becomes natural, attention shifts again. Instead of measuring progress by how visible it is, the mind begins exploring how actions themselves can remain focused and disciplined without needing explanation or announcement to the outside world. Silence does more than protect your emotions. It also protects your strategy. The moment you begin explaining every plan, every idea, and every intention, you begin revealing the blueprint of your next move. Many people share their thoughts openly because it feels natural, it feels honest. Yet there is a quiet cost hidden inside that openness. When people know your plans, they begin adjusting to them. They prepare responses. They form opinions. Some offer advice that shifts your direction. Others begin competing with the idea you have just revealed. When plans are exposed too early, they stop belonging entirely to you. The conversation around them begins influencing their shape. People question details, suggest alternatives, and sometimes even challenge the direction itself. None of this may come from bad intentions, yet every outside voice adds another layer of pressure. The more voices involved, the harder it becomes to think clearly. Silence protects clarity. When you move quietly, your thinking remains focused on the work rather than on the reaction of others. You are free to change direction without explaining yourself. You can test ideas without defending them. You can adjust your path without feeling the need to justify every step. That freedom becomes incredibly valuable. People often underestimate how much information they reveal when they speak too quickly. During casual conversations, plans slip into the open. Goals are described in detail. Strategies are explained with excitement. The speaker may feel proud of sharing the vision. Yet the listener now understands exactly what direction the speaker intends to take. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself." Part of that inner strength comes from protecting your focus. When plans remain private, the mind stays calmer. There is no pressure to prove the idea immediately. There is no need to defend every decision. The work can grow quietly without constant interruption. Silence also gives you something more valuable than privacy. It gives you observation. When you speak less, you naturally begin listening more carefully. Conversations become opportunities to understand people rather than moments to impress them. You start noticing details that would normally pass unnoticed. People reveal a great deal about themselves when they feel comfortable talking. They reveal their priorities, their fears, their ambitions, and sometimes even their weaknesses. While they speak openly, you gather understanding. This is not manipulation, it is awareness. Seneca once said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Many arguments and misunderstandings grow from assumptions rather than facts. When you listen carefully, those assumptions become clearer. You begin understanding what truly motivates someone rather than reacting to the surface of their words. Observation becomes a powerful advantage. Instead of reacting quickly, you learn to read situations calmly. You notice how people respond under pressure. You notice when someone speaks from confidence and when someone speaks from insecurity. These small insights gradually build a deeper understanding of human behavior. Epictetus once said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." This simple idea carries more wisdom than it appears at first. Listening expands knowledge. Speaking too quickly often limits it. The more you listen, the more information becomes available to you. Strategic silence is not about hiding from conversation. It is about choosing your moments carefully. You speak when your words add clarity. You remain quiet when speaking would only expose unnecessary details. Over time, this habit strengthens your judgment. Carl Jung once said, "Thinking is difficult, that's why most people judge." Many quick conversations are filled with judgment rather than understanding. When people rush to speak, they often stop thinking deeply about what they hear, but the person who listens carefully gains time to reflect before responding. That reflection changes the quality of communication. Instead of reacting emotionally, you respond thoughtfully. Your words carry more meaning because they are chosen carefully. People begin noticing that your responses feel measured rather than impulsive. That calm presence quietly earns respect. Silence also prevents distraction. When your plans remain private, your attention stays on execution. The work becomes the center of your focus. Each step is guided by improvement rather than by the opinions of others. This steady concentration allows ideas to mature naturally. At the same time, the ability to observe continues growing. You begin understanding patterns in conversations, patterns in behavior, and patterns in decision-making. These patterns reveal more about a situation than words alone ever could. By listening to others and reflecting on your own reactions, you begin seeing how your thinking evolves. This awareness deepens your judgment and sharpens your decisions. Gradually, you become more deliberate in how you move through conversations and opportunities. Instead of rushing to share every plan, you choose carefully what needs to be said and what can remain unspoken. This restraint preserves energy and protects direction. In time, the habit of quiet observation becomes second nature. You no longer feel the need to explain every thought. You recognize that understanding people often matters more than convincing them. That realization changes how you approach both conversation and strategy. And as this awareness deepens, another advantage begins to appear. When people cannot easily measure your intentions, they often underestimate your direction, creating space for progress that grows quietly before anyone fully realizes what is unfolding. Another strange truth begins to reveal itself when you stop explaining yourself to everyone around you. At first, it feels unusual. Many people are used to clarifying their intentions, defending their choices, and proving their abilities through constant explanation. It almost feels like a social requirement. When someone misunderstands you, the instinct is to correct them. When someone doubts you, the instinct is to show them they are wrong. Yet something interesting begins to happen when you quietly resist that instinct. When you stop rushing to prove yourself, people often begin forming their own assumptions about you, and very often those assumptions underestimate you. In the beginning, this can feel uncomfortable. Human beings naturally want recognition. We want people to understand our abilities, our goals, and the effort we invest in our work. When someone overlooks that effort, it can feel unfair. But the moment you stop needing everyone to recognize your potential, a new advantage appears. When people underestimate you, they lower their guard. They become less cautious around you. They speak more openly. They reveal more information than they normally would. While they believe they understand your limits, they unknowingly reveal their own. Conversations become more revealing. Plans become easier to read. Motivations become clearer. The person who is underestimated gains a quiet window into the thinking of others, and that understanding becomes valuable knowledge. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." That idea carries a deeper message about restraint. The need to prove oneself often pushes people toward impulsive behavior. They argue, they defend, they compete for recognition. But when you resist that impulse and remain steady, you remove yourself from that cycle. Instead of reacting emotionally, you remain calm and observant. Underestimation creates a kind of freedom that many people never experience. When others expect little from you, there is less pressure to perform for an audience. You are free to learn quietly. You are free to experiment without every step being evaluated. Growth can happen without constant commentary. This quiet space becomes extremely valuable. Seneca once said, "He who is brave is free." That freedom often begins inside the mind. When you stop depending on approval, you become less controlled by the opinions around you. Your direction becomes guided by purpose rather than by recognition. In that state, underestimation loses its sting and begins to feel like an opportunity. Many of history's quiet achievers experienced this advantage. They were not always recognized at the beginning of their journey. Some were even dismissed or overlooked. Yet that lack of attention allowed them to refine their skills without distraction. While others were busy competing for attention, they were building competence. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." Many people spend their time managing how they appear to others rather than strengthening who they actually are. They measure success through recognition rather than through development. But the person who is underestimated often escapes this trap. Because attention is limited, the focus shifts naturally toward growth. This quiet period of growth builds something powerful. It builds patience, it builds discipline, and it builds a deeper form of confidence. Instead of confidence based on praise, it becomes confidence based on preparation. You know how much work has been invested. You know the obstacles you have already faced. That knowledge does not require validation. Over time, the results begin to show themselves naturally. Skills become sharper. Decisions become clearer. Opportunities appear because preparation quietly meets the right moment. When that moment arrives, people who once underestimated you are often surprised. They struggle to understand how the change happened so suddenly. But for the person who built it, nothing was sudden. The progress was gradual. It developed in quiet moments of effort when no one else was paying attention. Every small improvement added another layer of strength. Every hour of practice refined the ability further. Epictetus once said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." That principle reflects the power of silent development. Instead of arguing about what you are capable of, you demonstrate it through your actions. Words become unnecessary when competence becomes visible. Underestimation also sharpens awareness. Because you are not distracted by proving yourself, you observe more carefully. You see how people behave when they believe they are in control. You notice patterns in their decisions. These observations become valuable lessons in understanding human nature. Aristotle once said, "The aim of the wise is not to secure pleasure, but to avoid pain." Much unnecessary conflict begins with the desire to defend pride. By refusing to chase recognition, you avoid many of those conflicts. Your energy remains focused on progress rather than on argument. Gradually, something changes inside you. The need to correct every misunderstanding fades. The urge to impress everyone disappears. Instead, you focus on building ability quietly and steadily. Underestimation becomes less of a problem and more of a protective cover. Then, one day, the difference becomes visible. Skills appear stronger than people expected. Decisions carry more weight. The calm confidence built through preparation becomes noticeable. And when that moment arrives, the impact is far greater because expectations were low. Quiet competence often surprises people, and surprise has a powerful effect. It shifts perception instantly. Those who once overlooked you begin seeing you differently. Yet by that point, the recognition no longer matters as much as the work itself, because the person who has learned to grow quietly understands something deeper. Progress does not require constant explanation. It only requires consistent effort. And when effort continues without the need for approval, another transformation begins forming quietly within the mind. Perhaps the deepest transformation begins the moment you stop needing applause. Up to this point, silence has protected your focus, deep thinking has sharpened your awareness, and quiet discipline has built strength beneath the surface. But there is another step that changes everything. It happens when you realize that recognition is no longer necessary for progress. This is where the philosophy becomes more demanding, because it asks you to examine your motives honestly. Many of us grow up believing that effort must be seen to matter. Achievements are shared, milestones are announced, and progress is displayed for others to confirm its value. Visibility becomes the measure of worth. Yet the moment you stop relying on that visibility, something powerful begins to shift inside you. Our culture quietly trains us to perform our lives in front of others. We share achievements, document improvement, and present our progress as proof that we are moving forward. There is nothing wrong with celebration, yet it can slowly create dependence. The mind begins to expect recognition as fuel for motivation. When applause appears, the effort feels meaningful. When applause disappears, enthusiasm fades. That pattern leaves a person vulnerable to the changing opinions of others. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." Those words remind us that fulfillment grows from within, not from the reactions around us. When motivation depends on external praise, it becomes unstable. Praise can vanish quickly. Approval can turn into criticism overnight. But when the source of motivation comes from personal values, the direction becomes steady. Imagine continuing your effort even when nobody notices. Imagine practicing discipline in the quiet hours when no audience exists to observe it. These are the moments when character forms. The decision to act with integrity when recognition is absent builds a deeper kind of strength. Over time, those private decisions accumulate. They form habits that shape the person you become. Seneca once said, "True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future." That idea extends to recognition as well. When you release the expectation of applause, the work itself becomes more satisfying. The process of improvement carries its own reward. Instead of chasing validation, you focus on becoming more capable with each passing day. This shift can feel unusual at first. The mind is accustomed to feedback. It expects someone to notice the effort or acknowledge the progress. But when that expectation fades, a different kind of motivation begins to grow. It is quieter, but also stronger. The desire to improve becomes internal rather than external. Epictetus once said, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. What lies within your power is the decision to act according to your values. Effort belongs to you. Discipline belongs to you. Recognition does not. By focusing only on what you control, you remove a large source of frustration from your life. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." When attention shifts inward, motivation becomes more stable. Instead of measuring success through approval, you measure it through alignment with your own principles. Each action becomes a reflection of who you choose to be, rather than a performance designed to impress others. This internal focus changes how discipline feels. It stops being something forced by expectation and becomes something chosen by intention. You wake up early, not because someone will praise your effort, but because you value growth. You keep your promises, not because others are watching, but because integrity matters to you. These quiet choices shape identity over time. Aristotle once said, "The energy of the mind is the essence of life." When that energy is directed toward personal development rather than external approval, progress becomes deeper. The mind becomes calmer, decisions become clearer. Instead of reacting to the shifting expectations of others, you follow a path guided by values. This path also protects you from disappointment. When recognition becomes the goal, effort can feel wasted if nobody notices it. But when improvement itself becomes the goal, every moment of practice has meaning. Even setbacks contribute to growth. The journey becomes more important than the applause that may or may not follow it. Gradually, the pressure to be seen disappears. Work continues quietly. Discipline continues steadily. The absence of applause no longer weakens motivation. In fact, it often strengthens it. Without the distraction of constant recognition, attention returns fully to the work itself. This quiet independence creates resilience. Public opinion changes quickly. People praise today and criticize tomorrow, but internal standards remain steady. When your motivation comes from those standards, outside opinions lose much of their power to disturb your direction. In time, this approach transforms how you experience effort. Work becomes less about proving something and more about becoming something. Each day offers another opportunity to practice the values you believe in. Each decision becomes another step in shaping the character you carry forward. And as this mindset deepens, the need to announce progress fades even further. The quiet discipline you have built continues guiding your actions, preparing you for a final realization about how true strength moves through the world without needing to declare itself. Something important begins to change once you stop depending on applause to feel valuable. The mind becomes quieter. The constant search for recognition slowly fades, and in its place a different kind of stability begins to grow. Instead of measuring your worth through reactions from others, you begin measuring it through the quality of your own actions. That shift is subtle at first, yet it gradually transforms how you move through the world. Praise may still appear from time to time, but it no longer defines you. Criticism may still arrive, but it no longer shakes your foundation. When praise comes, you receive it calmly. You appreciate it, but you do not depend on it. You understand that admiration often reflects the perception of others rather than the full reality of your work. Because of that awareness, you accept praise with gratitude while remaining steady in your direction. It becomes a pleasant moment rather than a source of identity. This quiet balance protects your focus. The same stability appears when criticism arrives. Instead of reacting with frustration or defensiveness, you examine it with curiosity. Some criticism carries truth, and that truth can help you grow. Other criticism reflects misunderstanding or emotion. When you are no longer desperate for approval, you can evaluate both calmly. The words of others become information rather than judgment about your value. Marcus Aurelius once said, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." That insight reveals how easily emotional reactions are shaped by interpretation. When praise feels necessary, its absence becomes painful. When criticism feels threatening, it creates anxiety. But when your sense of worth grows from internal principles, the emotional weight of these reactions begins to fade. The crowd has always held enormous influence over people. Approval can lift someone's spirit quickly, and rejection can bring sudden doubt. Yet depending on that approval creates a fragile foundation. The moment self-worth depends on public opinion, the direction of life begins shifting with every changing voice. True freedom often begins with emotional independence. When your confidence rests on your own values rather than on applause, you become less vulnerable to the opinions of others. You can listen to feedback without feeling controlled by it. You can consider suggestions without losing your sense of direction. This independence does not mean ignoring people or rejecting advice. It simply means that your identity no longer depends on their approval. You remain open to learning while staying grounded in your principles. That balance creates clarity in moments that might otherwise feel confusing. When people chase approval, they often shape their actions around expectations. They begin adjusting their behavior to satisfy the crowd. Over time, they lose connection with their own values. But the person who builds self-worth internally moves differently. Their actions are guided by meaning rather than by attention. Decisions become simpler because they are rooted in personal conviction. Instead of asking how others will react, they ask whether the choice aligns with their character. This way of living creates emotional stability. The mind becomes less reactive and more reflective. Situations that once triggered strong emotional swings now feel easier to navigate. Praise and criticism still exist, but they no longer control the rhythm of your thinking. Mastery over emotion does not mean suppressing feeling. It means understanding how feeling arises and choosing how to respond to it. When external reactions lose their power over your identity, the mind becomes steadier. This steadiness changes how you interact with others. Conversations feel calmer because you are not trying to defend your worth. Feedback becomes useful rather than threatening. Even disagreement becomes easier to handle because your sense of value remains intact. Aristotle once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." Self-knowledge forms the core of emotional independence. The more clearly you understand your principles, the less easily they are shaken by outside opinions. Instead of searching for confirmation from others, you recognize it within your own actions. Over time, this internal clarity becomes visible to others. People notice the calm confidence that comes from quiet self-respect. Your reactions appear thoughtful rather than impulsive. Your decisions carry steadiness rather than uncertainty. This presence often earns more respect than any attempt to prove yourself. The world continues speaking loudly around you, but its volume no longer determines your direction. Praise may encourage you, yet it does not define you. Criticism may challenge you, yet it does not weaken your resolve. Both become signals rather than commands. Through this independence, the mind gains remarkable clarity. Decisions feel less clouded by fear of judgment. Effort becomes more focused because it is guided by values rather than by expectations. You continue improving quietly, not because others are watching, but because growth itself has become meaningful. And as that clarity deepens, another realization begins forming quietly within the mind. When a person becomes steady in their identity, they also begin discovering a deeper sense of peace in how they move through the world. Eventually, something begins to happen that is difficult to notice at first. The ideas that once felt separate slowly merge into a single way of thinking. Silence, reflection, discipline, and independence from approval begin working together. What started as small adjustments in behavior gradually becomes a mindset. It shapes how you respond to conversations, how you handle pressure, and how you direct your effort each day. Instead of forcing yourself to act differently, the change begins to feel natural. The habits quietly reinforce one another. You speak less than before, not because you have nothing to say, but because you have learned that words carry weight. When speech becomes intentional, every sentence matters more. Conversations become clearer and more focused. People begin listening more carefully because they notice that you no longer fill every moment with explanation. Silence creates space where observation can grow. At the same time, observation becomes a powerful skill. When you listen closely, you begin noticing patterns that once passed unnoticed. You see how people respond when they feel pressure. You notice the difference between confidence and insecurity. Small details in tone, timing, and expression reveal more than long explanations ever could. Understanding grows quietly in these moments. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say or think or do, only what you do." That tranquility emerges when attention returns to your own actions rather than to the opinions around you. The energy that once went toward defending yourself becomes available for improvement instead. This shift creates a steady rhythm of progress. Reactions begin slowing down as well. Instead of responding instantly to every situation, you pause long enough to think. Emotion still appears, but it no longer dictates behavior. You observe it, understand it, and choose your response carefully. Over time, this discipline strengthens your judgment. Decisions become calmer and more deliberate. Epictetus once said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control." That freedom grows through self-mastery. When your reactions are guided by intention rather than impulse, you move through the world with more stability. Situations that once caused frustration now become opportunities to practice patience. As speech becomes quieter and reactions become calmer, another change takes place. Thinking becomes deeper. Instead of rushing through decisions, you take time to consider their direction. Each choice is no longer just about the present moment. It becomes part of a longer path. You begin recognizing how small actions shape larger outcomes. When attention turns inward, you start understanding your motives more clearly. You recognize what truly matters and what merely distracts. This understanding makes your decisions stronger. Gradually, your actions begin speaking louder than your explanations. Plans remain quiet while the work continues steadily. Progress may not attract attention immediately, yet the results slowly become visible. Skills sharpen, discipline strengthens. The small efforts repeated each day create a pattern that others begin noticing. Seneca once said, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body." The challenges faced along the way become part of that strength. Obstacles that once seemed discouraging begin feeling like necessary training. Each difficulty adds another layer of resilience. The person you become through these experiences matters more than the recognition that might follow them. When this mindset settles in, the need to prove yourself begins fading. You no longer feel pressure to announce every improvement. Instead, you continue working quietly, knowing that consistent effort produces its own evidence. Over time, the results appear naturally. People notice the discipline, the calmness, and the steady direction. What surprises many people is that this recognition often arrives unexpectedly. Observers who once overlooked your effort begin noticing the difference. They see the confidence built through preparation. They see the clarity that comes from careful thinking. Yet by the time this attention appears, your motivation no longer depends on it. Aristotle once said, "Quality is not an act, it is a habit." The habits formed through silence and reflection shape everything that follows. They influence how you approach challenges, how you speak to others, and how you pursue your goals. Over time, those habits become part of your character. Character built this way carries a quiet strength. It does not rely on constant praise. It does not collapse when criticism appears. It remains steady because it is supported by consistent action. Each day adds another layer of proof that discipline works. People often assume that visible success appears suddenly. They see the result, but not the preparation. They notice the outcome, but not the years of quiet effort behind it. What appears sudden from the outside is often the final stage of a long process. This process begins with simple choices: choosing silence instead of reaction, choosing reflection instead of impulse, choosing steady effort instead of loud announcement. Each of these choices seems small in the moment, yet together they shape a powerful direction. Over time, the pattern becomes clear. Silence prepares the mind. Deep thinking sharpens the strategy. Quiet work builds the result. When these elements combine, progress becomes inevitable. Recognition may arrive eventually, but it is no longer the purpose. The real purpose is growth itself. Each day offers another opportunity to practice discipline, clarity, and patience. Through that practice, the person you become grows stronger. And in the end, the principle guiding all of this remains simple and steady. Be silent, think deep, win quietly. And in the end, the people who truly change their lives rarely announce it while it's happening. They move differently. While the world is arguing, they are observing. While others are explaining their plans, they are quietly building them. While noise fills every corner of the world, they protect their focus and keep moving forward. Silence sharpens the mind. Deep thinking guides the path. Quiet discipline builds results that no words can ever replace. So if something in this message resonated with you, keep that mindset with you after this moment ends. Let the world rush if it wants to. You don't have to. Real growth happens slowly, patiently, and often in places where nobody is looking. If this idea of quiet strength speaks to you, take a moment to watch the next video appearing on your screen. It will deepen this journey and help you strengthen the mindset you're building. And truly, thank you for being here and for being part of Stoic Journal.